Iron sword, huh? What are you killing, butterflies?
Alright, so let's talk about the Nords in Skyrim, and specifically let's talk about why a lot of them are pretty openly racist and xenophobic. Now, if you've played Skyrim for more than like an hour, you've probably noticed this. The way they treat the Dark Elves in Windhelm. The whole Skyrim belongs to the Nords thing. The fact that they literally have a guy named Rolfith Stonefist who just walks around harassing non-Nords in the streets. And look, I'm not here to defend any of this. Racism is obviously bad, whether it's in a video game or real life, but the thing about Skyrim is that Bethesda actually put a lot of thought into why the Nords are the way they are. There's centuries of history and context that explains how they got to this point. So today we're going deep into Nord lore. We're talking about their origins, their culture, the major historical events that shaped them, and how all of that led to the situation we see in Skyrim. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly why Ulfric Stormcloak and his followers act the way they do. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. Who are the Nords? Okay, so first things first, let's establish who the Nords actually are. The Nords are the native human inhabitants of Skyrim. They're descendants of the Atmorans, who migrated from the northern continent of Atmora thousands of years ago. And when I say thousands, I mean this goes back to the Malefic era, which is basically prehistoric times in Elder Scrolls lore. Now, the Nords have always been a warrior culture. From the very beginning, they valued strength, honor, and martial prowess above pretty much everything else. Their religion revolves around Sjor, Kain, and the other Nordic pantheon gods, and they believe that dying in battle is the ultimate honor because it gets you into Sovngarde, which is basically their version of Valhalla. This is important because it shapes everything about how Nords view the world. They respect strength, they respect people who can hold their own in a fight, and they have very little patience for what they see as weakness or cowardice. Keep that in mind as we go through this, because it's going to come up a lot. Chapter 2. The Night of Tears. Alright, so let's go way back. Back to the event that basically defines Nord-Elf relations for the rest of history. The Night of Tears. So the Atmorans, the ancestors of the Nords, they came to Tamriel and started settling in Skyrim. And at first things were okay. The native inhabitants were the Snow Elves, also called the Former before they got turned into those blind underground creatures we fight in the game. And for a while, there was relative peace between the Atmorans and the Snow Elves. But then, the Snow Elves attacked. They attacked the Atmoran city of Sarthal in what's known as the Night of Tears. They slaughtered almost everyone. Men, women, children, didn't matter. The entire city was basically wiped out. Now, why did this happen? Well, according to the lore, the Snow Elves discovered that the Atmorans had found the Eye of Magnus, this incredibly powerful magical artifact buried beneath Sarthal, and the Snow Elves wanted it. So they launched a surprise attack and tried to take it by force. Only a handful of Atmorans survived, including Ysgramor, who would become the most legendary figure in Nord history. And Ysgramor did not take this well. He returned to Atmora, gathered an army called the 500 Companions, and came back to Skyrim with one goal: revenge, and they got it. They launched a genocidal campaign against the Snow Elves, hunting them down, destroying their cities, and driving them to near extinction. The survivors fled underground and eventually became the twisted, blind Former we see in the game. But the point is, this event, the Night of Tears, it's burned into Nord cultural memory. It's the defining moment of their history. It taught them that elves can't be trusted, that they'll smile to your face and then stab you in the back the moment they see an advantage. And this isn't just ancient history to the Nords. They still sing songs about Ysgramor. They still revere him as the greatest hero of their people. The companions in Whiterun literally trace their lineage back to Ysgramor's 500. So when you hear Nords talking about elves with suspicion or hostility, this is where it comes from. It's generational trauma that's been passed down for thousands of years. Chapter 3. The Dragon War and Skyrim's founding. Okay, so after the Snow Elves were dealt with, the Nords had to deal with another problem. Dragons. Yeah, so back in the Malefic era, dragons ruled over humans. They were basically gods, and the humans were their slaves. The dragon priests ran things day to day, but the dragons were in charge. And the Nords were not happy about this. Eventually, there was a rebellion. Humans rose up against the dragons, and this turned into a massive war. And here's where it gets interesting. The Nords won. They actually defeated the dragons, with help from Paarthurnax and a few other dragons who sided with humans. This is huge for Nord culture because it reinforced their belief that they can overcome anything through strength and determination. They didn't just survive in Skyrim, they conquered it. they killed gods. They proved that no one, not the snow elves, not the dragons, no one was going to push them around. And after the Dragon War, the Nords basically had free reign over Skyrim. They built their civilization, established their holds, and for a long time, they were the dominant power in northern Tamriel. They even expanded beyond Skyrim and controlled parts of modern-day Morrowind and High Rock at various points. This is the golden age of Nord culture. This is what the older generation remembers, or at least what they've been taught to remember. A time when the Nords were strong, independent, and in control of their own destiny. Chapter 4, The Empire and the Loss of Independence. Now we're getting into more recent history, and this is where things start to go wrong for the Nords. In the second era, Tiber Septim, who was himself a Nord from Atmora originally, conquered all of Tamriel and formed the Third Empire, and Skyrim became part of that empire. At first, this wasn't really a problem because Tiber Septim was basically one of them. He was a Nord warrior who conquered the world through strength. That's very on brand for Nord culture. But over time, the empire changed. It became more cosmopolitan, more bureaucratic, more influenced by the other provinces and cultures. And the Nords started to feel like they were losing their identity. Then, in 3E433, the Oblivion Crisis happened. Mehrunes Dagon tried to invade Tamriel, and Martin Septim sacrificed himself to stop it. The Septim bloodline ended, and the Third Empire started to fall apart. And then, the Great War happened. And this is really where everything goes to hell. In 4E171, the Old Mary Dominion, which is basically a faction of High Elves who think they're superior to everyone else, declared war on the Empire, and the Empire got absolutely wrecked. The Dominion sacked the Imperial city. They almost won the war completely. The Empire eventually fought back and managed to turn things around a bit, but they were exhausted, so they signed the White Gold Concordat, a peace treaty with the Dominion, and part of that treaty, part of the terms the Empire agreed to, was banning the worship of Talos. Chapter 5, The Talos Ban and Why It Matters. Okay, so let's talk about Talos, because if you want to understand why the Nords are so angry in Skyrim, you have to understand what Talos means to them. Talos is Tiber Septim, the guy who founded the Third Empire, and after his death, he achieved apotheosis and became a god. He's literally the ninth divine, worshipped alongside the other Aedra. And for the Nords, Talos isn't just a god, he's their god. He was a Nord. He conquered the world as a Nord. He represents everything they value: strength, ambition, martial prowess, the ability to shape your own destiny through force of will. Worshipping Talos isn't just a religious thing for the Nords, it's a cultural identity thing. It's a statement that says, we matter, our history matters, our people produced a literal god. So when the Empire agreed to ban Talos worship, when they signed that treaty with the Dominion and said, yeah, we'll stop worshipping Talos if that's what it takes for peace, the Nords saw that as the ultimate betrayal, because it wasn't just about religion, it was the Empire saying, your culture doesn't matter, your beliefs don't matter, we'll throw all of that away to appease the elves. And remember what I said earlier about the Night of Tears, about how the Nords have this deep-seated cultural memory of being betrayed by elves. Yeah, this just confirmed all of that. The Empire betrayed them to appease the Aldmeri Dominion. The elves won again, not through direct conquest this time, but by forcing the Empire to erase Nord culture and identity. This is why Ulfric Stormcloak starts a civil war. This is why so many Nords join the Stormcloaks. It's not just about Talos worship in isolation, it's about everything that represents. Chapter 6, Xenophobia in Windhelm. Alright, so now let's talk about the ugly stuff. The actual racism and xenophobia we see in the game. The most obvious example is Windhelm, Ulfric's city. And man, Windhelm is rough if you're not a Nord. The Dark Elves are forced to live in the Grey Quarter, which is basically a slum. They're treated like second-class citizens. They can't get decent jobs. They're harassed in the streets. And Ulfric, for all his talk about freedom and independence, does absolutely nothing to help them. Then you've got the Argonians, who aren't even allowed inside the city walls. They have to live on the docks outside, because apparently even being in the same city as Argonians is too much for some Nords. And you talk to NPCs like Rolf Stonefist, and they'll just openly say the most racist stuff. Skyrim belongs to the Nords. Go back where you came from. All that. Now, here's the thing. The game doesn't excuse this. Bethesda makes it very clear that this behavior is wrong. You have characters like Brunwolf Free Winter, who explicitly calls out Ulfric for ignoring the plight of non-Nords in his city. You have quests where you help Dark Elves deal with the racism they're facing. but the game does provide context for why this is happening. The Nords are scared, they're angry, they feel like their entire way of life is under attack. The Empire betrayed them, the Dominion is pulling the strings from behind the scenes, and everywhere they look, they see their culture and traditions being eroded. And when people are scared and angry, they lash out. They look for someone to blame. And unfortunately, the easiest targets are the outsiders. The Dark Elves who fled Morrowind after Red Mountain erupted, the Argonians who came looking for work, the Khajiit merchants who travel through. It's not right, but it's human nature. Or Nord nature, I guess. Chapter 7, the Stormcloak. Here's what's really interesting about the Stormcloaks though. They're fighting for freedom and independence, but they're incredibly exclusionary about who deserves that freedom. Ulfric talks about liberating Skyrim from Imperial rule, about letting the Nords govern themselves, about preserving their culture and traditions, and on paper, that all sounds pretty reasonable, right? But then you actually look at how the Stormcloaks operate, and it's clear that when they say freedom, they mean freedom for Nords. Everyone else is either an afterthought or actively excluded. The Dark Elves who have lived in Windhelm for generations, still treated like outsiders. The Argonians who work the docks, not even allowed in the city. Non-Nord Jarls get replaced with Nord loyalists if the Stormcloaks take their cities. And this is the fundamental problem with nationalist movements, even in a fantasy setting. They start with legitimate grievances. The Nords do have real reasons to be upset with the Empire, but then they slide into this exclusionary us versus them mentality, where anyone who isn't part of the in-group becomes the enemy. Ulfric himself is a complicated character. He genuinely believes he's doing the right thing. He really does want to protect Nord culture and independence. But he's also blind to the harm his movement is causing to the non-Nords living in Skyrim. Or maybe he just doesn't care. It's hard to say. Chapter 8. Not all Nords. Now, I want to be clear about something. Not all Nords are racist, not even close. You've got characters like Brunwulf Freewinter, who actively opposes the mistreatment of non-Nords. You've got Balgruuf, the Jarl of Whiterun, who tries to stay neutral in the Civil War and treats everyone fairly, regardless of race. You've got plenty of Imperial-aligned Nords who think Ulfric is making things worse. Even among the common people, you meet plenty of Nords who are just trying to live their lives and don't care about all this political stuff. The farmer outside Whiterun isn't sitting around thinking about how much he hates elves, he's worried about getting his crops in before winter. The racism and xenophobia we see in Skyrim is concentrated in specific areas and among specific groups. It's worst in Windhelm and among the Stormcloaks. It's much less prevalent in places like Solitude or Whiterun or Markarth. But the thing is, even the Nords who aren't actively racist still carry that cultural baggage. They still grew up hearing stories about the Night of Tears. They still were raised in a culture that values Nord traditions and Nord strength above all else. They still feel that resentment toward the Empire and the Dominion. So while not every Nord is running around yelling, "Skyrim belongs to the Nords," a lot of them sympathize with that sentiment on some level. They might not express it the way Rolf Stonefist does, but they feel it. Chapter 9, the bigger picture. So let's zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture. Because Skyrim as a game is actually doing something pretty smart here. Bethesda could have just made the Stormcloaks the bad guys. They could have made them cartoonishly evil racists with no redeeming qualities and made the Empire the clear good guys. That would have been easy, but they didn't do that. Instead, they created them a situation where both sides have legitimate points and both sides have serious flaws. The Stormcloaks are fighting for self-determination and cultural preservation, which are inherently valuable things, but they're also xenophobic and exclusionary, and their movement is actively harming non-Nords. The Empire is more cosmopolitan and generally treats everyone more fairly, but they also betrayed their own principles by banning Talos worship, and they're propping up a failing system that many Nords genuinely don't want to be part of anymore. Neither side is completely right or completely wrong, and that's what makes the Civil War quest line so interesting, because you, the player, have to decide which set of flaws you're more willing to accept. And the Nord racism is part of that equation. It's not just flavor text or background detail, it's a core part of understanding what the Stormcloak Rebellion really represents. It forces you to ask yourself, even if the Nords have legitimate grievances, does that justify the way they're treating non-Nords? Can you support a movement for freedom when that movement doesn't extend freedom to everyone? These are genuinely difficult questions, and the game doesn't give you easy answers. Chapter 10. Why this matters. So why does all of this matter? Why did I just spend 50 minutes talking about racism in a 13-year-old video game? Because Skyrim's depiction of the Nords actually touches on something real. the way nationalist movements form, the way cultural anxiety and economic decline can turn into xenophobia, the way people can have legitimate grievances but express them in harmful ways. You can see parallels to real-world history and politics if you look. Obviously, the specifics are different. We don't have elves or dragon gods in real life, but the underlying dynamics, the fear of cultural erasure, the resentment toward outside powers, the scapegoating of minorities, the appeal of strongman leaders promising to restore past glory, that's all very real, and I think Bethesda knew what they were doing when they wrote this. They created a situation that feels authentic and complicated, because real life is authentic and complicated. They didn't just want to give you good guys and bad guys to choose between. They wanted you to think about what you're supporting and why. So there you have it, the full story of why the Nords in Skyrim are the way they are. It's not just, oh, they're racist because they're bad people. It's centuries of history, cultural trauma, legitimate grievances, and fear all mixing together into this toxic stew of nationalism and xenophobia. Does understanding the reasons excuse the behavior? Number. The way Dark Elves and Argonians are treated in Windhelm is still wrong, regardless of context, but it does make it more interesting, more nuanced, more human in a weird way. Because people aren't usually racist just because they're evil. They're racist because they're scared or angry, or because they've been taught to think a certain way, or because it serves their political interests. And Skyrim captures that complexity better than most games do. Anyway, that's my deep dive into Nord culture and racism in Skyrim. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you side with the Stormcloaks despite their flaws, or does the racism push you toward the Empire? Or do you just ignore the Civil War entirely and go fight dragons instead? I'll catch you in the next one.